Welcome to the Joe Cohen Show. Join me as I share my experience with biohacking and invite top health experts to explore the latest technology, supplements, research, and resources for optimizing your body and brain. Hello, everyone. I'm here with Dr. Puya Yazdi. He's actually the co-founder of SelfDecode, and he works on all the science-related stuff. I wanted to talk to him about what we do at SelfDecode, polygenic risk scoring, genetics, and how what we're doing is different from other companies, because there's a lot of companies on the market that claim to be doing genetics, and it's important to understand what they're doing and what we're doing, and what the benefits of each thing is, or if what they're doing is valid. Thanks for coming on, Puya. Tell us about your credentials, your education, and then how you got into this specific field.
Okay. I was originally a doctor. So what happened is I was in an undergrad. I actually worked in a lab that did population genetics, and I thought it was super cool. But back then, the whole genome wasn't even out. Like the human genome wasn't sequenced. It was like counting fruit flies all day. And there was but I thought it was still cool. It was all about very math, but there wasn't a real application of it. So I ended up going to medical school at USC, and then I went to Stanford after that, and I was a resident pathology there. And then by that time, the whole genome was sequenced, and microarray technology had come out. And I got the bug. I was like, oh, wait, population genetics is going to be, now you can do it in real life and with actual clinical applications. And so what happened is I transitioned from a career of clinical practice into being a physician scientist. And I did multiple postdocs. I got this CERN fellowship and so on. And I basically became like a physician scientist who specialized in genomics and population genomics and that kind of stuff.
Go ahead. How long were you doing the population genomics for?
I did 6 years of various bioinformatics and population genomics fellowships and so on. And then I formed a company that was basically offering these services to pharmaceutical companies. So at that time, pharmaceutical companies didn't have a lot of internal stuff for this. So I was doing a lot of AI. Actually, it wasn't AI back then, but machine learning using population genetics for drug discovery for different people. And eventually I met Joe, and I thought it was super cool because you know what happens is when you're out there, you realize, oh, it's really hard to get anything changed in the medical system. Like it takes years, even though if something is useful. And Joe, on the other hand, was like, I want to use this stuff on myself. I want to get this stuff to our customers so people use it because it's helped me out. I was like music to my ears, and that's how we ended up looking up over here and doing this because at it is our biggest competitor who also does good models. They're not selling this to anybody. They're trying to make it very, we'll wait and then we'll do that. I want this used right away. I don't want anyone to get sick in the next 10 years because we're waiting for no reason to sell it to a big place. And Joe felt the same, so it made perfect sense. Yeah.
All right, awesome. So let's get into, basically, let's speak very candidly about this. So just for people to have an understanding, Puya is a skeptic in a lot of ways about the way that genetics is being done currently, right? Would you say that, Puya?
Absolutely.
Okay, so you have these different companies, and a lot of them are looking at 50 variants, or they're looking at a small number of variants. What do you think of those types of companies looking at small number of variants?
This stuff Joe already knows because we've had these discussions hundreds of times. But to let the listeners in, basically what happens, it makes it very, for a company, if you have scientists who really don't know what they're doing or they're just trying to get something out, you find a paper and the paper talks about 10 of the variants that are possibly associated with disease. You make a model and you're like, oh, look, we're telling you your increased risk of cardiovascular disease based on these 50 variants. Now, as Joe knows, this is actually not really scientifically valid because in reality, the amount of variants that are increasing or decreasing your risk for a disorder and that are functionally related to a disease is typically runs in the thousands to maybe even hundreds of thousands or more. That's what they call them polygenic traits. The scientific term you use is polygenic, like how tall you are, what your weight is. This is different than the kind of genetics you learned in high school where it was like, oh, one gene or one variant makes you have this shape and another shape. These are polygenic in nature. And so when you order kits from those kinds of companies, what they're giving you is basically a coin toss. And it looks scientific because there's variants associated there. There's like a reference for a paper. But if you test those out, it's basically a coin toss. It's maybe statistically it's giving you a 1% to 2% difference than a coin toss, but that's a coin toss in reality. That's the reason why, if you go to a clinic, a doctor's not ordering those tests. Otherwise, doctors would be ordering those tests. And so one of the things we started doing here is to try to build actual tests that a doctor would order. And so that's been our kind of process through this thing. And that's why, for instance, we have models that look at thousands of variants or even hundreds of thousands. And I think there's even one that looks like at 1 million variants, because the more of that stuff you have, the more accurate the test becomes when it comes to predicting a disease or a disorder. And part of the process is you have to have a lot of data in order to test these models out. And so we have accumulated that data from public resources and other places in order to test it out. So there's two parts of this validity. There's a science back up what you're doing, which is most of these consumer things fail. But there's a second part. Even when some consumer companies do try to have tests that are more like ours, where they're looking at hundreds of thousands or thousands of genes, you have to then go actually test this in a data set to figure out how valid they are. And that's the thing I think only we are providing, as I know, out there. And I've looked at tons of other companies. I can't find one company outside of us that's done that second part, where it's not only do we have these models we've generated, but we've gone through the process of actually validating these to figure out how clinically useful they are in data sets where we know people who have these disorders or not, and we're testing them. Look, I cannot find one other company, direct-to-consumer, that's currently doing these things.
There's a very few, like one or two that is doing this in the commercial setting, trying to set it up with doctors or whatever, but they're not doing consumer testing.
Correct. There's a couple companies that are also doing these kinds of things, but you cannot purchase their stuff. It's almost like pure R&D companies, and they're trying to do it through different regulatory channels or sell it to giant biobanks and stuff. But you cannot order these tests currently on the market with this kind of clinical validity behind them outside of us.
Yeah, and I go to a lot of these conferences. You don't really go too much to these, to some of these like biohacking or functional medicine conferences. And what is these people talking about how to use genetics? And it's the same thing. They're looking at 50 variants, and they're just, it just seems like, why are they so ignorant on this topic, do you think?
Well, part of the problem is, this is new technology that's on the cutting edge. Whenever you have a new technology on the cutting edge, it's very hard to know what's going on unless you're an actual expert in this cutting edge technology. And so it just makes sense. The way you learn genetics in high school is you have this gene, and if you have this allele or that allele, it does this. So it just makes it very easy. Oh, now I'm looking at 50 alleles. This is just like I learned in my genetics textbook. And they are not aware of the kind of cutting edge technology where that doesn't really help you predict a disorder, all right? So I think there's ignorance out there in the field, which is understandable. It's the same thing as AI, right? AI is now the new hot thing, and people are going around, here's a new AI thing, here's a new AI thing, and then when you get under the hood, most of that stuff is not very good. There's a difference between some random guy's AI model and what you can get at OpenAI, right? At OpenAI, they hired the scientists at the cutting edge to make those models out there, which is the same process we're doing here at SelfDecode, where we're trying to bring this stuff out for everybody in a manner where eventually your doctor is going to be ordering these tests through us, hopefully, and being used in a clinical setting continuously going forward.
And one of the decisions I made relatively, like probably 3 years ago, was that we realized that because there were no other companies doing this and they were just pumping out garbage, we said, hey, why don't we also license this to other companies so that they don't have to pump out garbage? Yeah, and I think part of the problem is, even when you talk to these people, it seems like there's a blockage. They just don't want to learn. They don't want to know what's going on. They bury their head in the sand.
Okay, let me try this. So when I was training as a scientist, there was a thing that every scientist used to joke around, which is that it's very hard to convince somebody what they're doing scientifically is wrong if it affects their ability to eat food. If their business is in that and they're making money at that, they're going to try to ignore all evidence that what they're doing is not appropriate, which makes sense. They're trying to make money out there. But to speak to what Joe's doing, one of the things we're really trying to do is make it super easy so that even if you've been using those kinds of tests as a health coach or a functional medicine doctor or as another company, you can really switch very easily to what we're doing. That's the other reason we haven't kept it in-house, as Joe said. But we want everybody to be using good stuff. That's part of our thing over here. We want everybody to be have, and you don't need a team of tons of bioinformaticians and tons of scientists. You can just license it out and it's ready to go for you,
So there's two ways that the functional medicine is using it, right? And we'll go through all the ways that you could use genetics in general, but the two ways the functional medicine is using it is they're looking at these GWAS studies for correlations, associations. Yep. So they're taking SNPs that have associations, and they're saying, okay, let's 1+1 this SNP and we get 2, and you're obviously you're of the opinion that's not valid at all. It's still, when you plus 1, you don't get 2, you get still a coin flip, right?
Basically, basically.
Yeah. And why is it not why can't they replicate this stuff? If there's they found an association, why is it not valid?
Okay, we're going to get a little bit technical here. Typically, they call them associations because you don't actually know if that variant is increasing your risk or not. Because what it could be doing, it could be just attached to the actual variant that's increasing or decreasing your risk.
It's correlated with another variant.
Correct. And you don't know what that variant is. This is like a big problem in genetics. And the reason is, when you inherit DNA for your mom and dad, it's chopped up into blocks. And they got their DNA chopped up into blocks from their parents and so on and so forth. So the DNA is attached to other pieces of DNA. And because it's attached to other pieces of DNA, you don't actually know which one's increasing your risk and which one kind of, because of the statistical test, was associated with the risk. And so that's part of the process. What we do over here, we try to create these machine learning pipelines and these kind of bioinformatic pipelines and computational stuff to try to zero in on which one of these is actually causal. And because we're zeroing in on that, we then test it in another data set, not the one that they did GWAS on, a completely different data set. Because if it's real, it should actually increase your ability or your accuracy in that other data set. And so that's why I was saying earlier why that part, the validating, is so important. That's how you know the SNPs you have are actually doing something.
Because it's able to be replicated, basically.
Correct.
Then you could see, yeah, right. If it's exactly, if you can replicate it, it means it's not a correlation anymore. It's more of a causation.
Correct.
Okay, so now, so if they are doing these GWAS studies, you think most of the time the variants that they find are not replicatable?
That's what actually GWAS studies tell you. So what happens is, when you do people do multiple GWAS studies, and then there's some that are in every one found. Those are the legit ones. And then there's a bunch that are only found in some of them. So that's typically one of the things we do is we don't just take a GWAS study. We take all the GWAS studies and we do this thing called meta-analysis. So we're statistically putting it all in there, and then we train in a data set where we have actual people's genotype and phenotype data, and then validate it in the other one. That's part of the process we do to make sure these things are not just random SNP you found in one paper. That means nothing. Yeah, I tell this to people all the time. One thing scientists all know that a lot of lay people don't know is that the majority of science that gets published is unreproducible. That's the reason why scientists are like, oh, it's a very interesting paper. We'll see what happens. Because the whole idea is you need multiple different groups to validate something. And eventually then you're like, okay, this is a legit scientific finding. And so that's the other word you have when you're using one paper. Yeah.
So let's say you have a SNP that could be reproduced. Some of these companies claim we only use the SNPs that are reproduced and have the most evidence behind it. Then you get into a little bit of a different problem, is how big is the impact, number one, and how do you add on to other SNPs? Because if you don't know what the original SNP is, that if it's just, if you have 5 SNPs like that, but they're actually all related to one other variant that's causing all 5 of them to be significant, then what you're really getting a lot of noise. It's not additive at that stage.
Correct. Here's the analogy I would say is, let's even say someone has a test where these 5 SNPs are all causative. They know they're all causative. These are all the best, and we have those same SNPs in our model. The problem is there's also all these other SNPs that are affecting your risk of this disorder. And if you're not measuring those, you don't actually know if this person is at increased or decreased risk. They could be, this test based on the 5 SNPs could be telling them they're at increased risk. But if you looked at all the other SNPs, they were decreasing their risk, and the total result at the end of the day would be that they're not at increased risk. That's the other thing you have to worry about. Does that make sense? It's like you have to look at all the data, not just,
So those are the two problems in the industry, is that one is, okay, let's say you found 5 SNPs and they're all independent variables, which again, it's hard to figure that out, right, with the way they're doing it. But let's say they were all independent. The problem is that each one of these variants has a very small effect on the overall genetic risk.
Correct.
What would you say as an example? Like if you find something that's it's replicated by a couple GWAS, what would the effect be? Like 1% of the total genetic risk?
When they do the test, the effect they find in a paper is inflated. Just something which people aware. When you look at the actual GWAS studies, that there's a known thing where the actual real risk is inflated when the way.
Why is that?
It's just the way the statistical tests are done. It's always inflated. This thing they call like winner's curse. But basically, what happens is you end up getting in a situation where your sample will have a perfect.
It's like data mining.
Yeah. It's just you end up getting like inflated risk. So in reality, most of the time, these things might be increasing your risk by 1%. And then there's all these other things that are decreasing your risk by 1%. So they cancel out that 1%. The one exception to that is there are like really rare genetic variants that are increasing your risk by 2 or 3-fold. But nobody's looking at that information out there.
Let's talk about that in a bit. But so the two main issues is a company, this is what happens. A company run by people that doesn't know, they've never studied population genomics. They don't really understand advanced polygenic risk scoring. What they can do is they can read PubMed, hire a scientist who maybe is a molecular geneticist. Would a molecular geneticist know this stuff?
No, it's a statistic. Most of the stuff you do requires computational biology knowledge. You have to be able to be very good at statistics and these kinds of things. It's a very different field than a classic geneticist who is doing knockout experiments. It's a molecular geneticist.
Right.
The problem is the kind of guys you need are very expensive, so they don't hire those people. And they hire who don't know what they're doing.
You're hiring people, even if they're from good universities, they don't have the skills that they can do the right. They're looking at single genetic variants or whatnot.
It's like I say, I have a scientific background. I know these things, but that doesn't make me a neurosurgeon, right? There's tons of stuff like in neurosurgery. You have to know. I don't know. Just because I'm a doctor and I know this stuff doesn't mean I know neurosurgery, right? And so that occurs a lot of times. Is they'll hire somebody. Oh, it's a scientist, geneticist. Okay, come on in. It's the same thing. It's just because I'm a doctor doesn't mean I
That's what happened in the first version. I actually hired a geneticist. They were geneticists, went to good universities, 2 of them. And what it turns out is they didn't actually know about this field at all. And they were just plugging in like a couple GWAS variants that were significant, and they were adding them together. But the two problems that you run into is, okay, even if you have the most significant ones, you don't know which one, if they're all correlated with each other, and you're just adding the same numbers, right? Like you're just adding the same things. They happen to be all related to one source, one causal source. And that's one thing. And then the other thing is, even if you add all 3 or 5 together, how much of an effect does that have on the overall risk if you're only looking at 3 or 5 variants?
Correct. Exactly. Like I said, even if these 5 are all correct, it's almost like you're not looking at everything else. And unless you're looking at everything else, you don't actually know if this patient or this customer is at increased or decreased risk at the end of the day.
And so then that's one way of doing it, where they look at these GWAS studies. The other way is, somebody will look at what they call functional variants. And that's where they're just looking at variants that seem to have some kind of causal effect, right? Correct. The problem with that gets into the same 2 problems, though, is that mainly one of the problems, which is it has a very small impact. Is that right?
Correct. Exactly. A lot of them, they are functional and are impacting your genetic background, but the effects are tiny. It's just when it comes to these polygenic traits, which is most diseases and things people care about, each variant has such a small effect that just focusing on one doesn't really help you out.
What would you say the effect of one of these variants is? Less than 1%?
Yeah, some of them are a little bit higher. Maybe they go up to 3-4%, or maybe even 5%. But once again, it's the same problem. You're isolating out one thing, looking at just on one thing. And even if that thing is 5 to 10%, everything else is so much more that it could cancel this out. And there's no way of you knowing that unless you measure everything else.
And obviously, none of them are using another data set to try to validate this.
Correct.
I think this is one of the biggest scams in the health industry, where people are selling genetic tests and they're selling garbage, really. And they're just burying their heads in the sand, right? They're educating other people, hey, this is how you figure out genetics, but actually they're just educating them on nonsense.
Correct. I agree with you 100%. It's not great for the consumers or the patients. It's ridiculous to expect consumers to know this. It's not great.
Okay, so there's the functional genetics, there's the GWAS. Let's talk about so let's talk about the academics. If we're talking about Harvard, Stanford, all these top academic centers, we look at the computational biology, departments, the what is it, evolutionary genetics or
Or
population genetics? It's computational biology and population genetics.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. So we look at those two departments. All these researchers on the cutting edge are all doing advanced polygenic risk scoring. They completely discount these GWAS single variant stuff, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. So they're all in the know.
Yeah, they're correct. They are. And they have conglomerates where they get together and they make polygenic risk score models like we do. Just to bring it up because we're quite proud of it, we got a paper, the preprints out, we're hoping to get published in the next couple months, where we directly compared our polygenic risk score models with that group, the Harvard groups, the big academic centers groups, and a competitor who doesn't sell direct to consumers. And our models were in an independent testing group more accurate than their models. That's our competition. I always tell Joe, our competition isn't really these other rinky-dinky, I'm sorry to say that, genetics companies. We're competing against Harvard, MIT, and Cambridge is what we're really competing against out here.
Okay. So let's go into, I want to talk about what are all the things, clinically significant things that people can get from genetics. Okay.
So this is one of my favorite things. Okay. And I always tell this to doctors, and this is when doctors get really excited. Let's say you have a person and you measure your LDL cholesterol, and your LDL cholesterol is high. Okay. Let's say it's high. And then you do a genetic test like we do for a cardiovascular disease or LDL or whatever, and you find out your genetic risk is actually low. What is that telling you? What it's telling you is it's your lifestyle that's causing you to be at elevated risk for cardiovascular disease, right? So in that person, you really just need to hone in on your diet and exercise, and you're going to have a low risk of getting any kind of heart disease in the future. But if the person's genetic risk is high and they have these high lab values, what's that telling you is the diet and exercise isn't going to do that much. That's when you need to look into, do I do supplementation or do I need medication and so on? And there's no way to figure this out. And it's the same thing. Let's say even your LDL cholesterol was good, all your biomarkers are good, and you realize you have high genetic risk for one of these disorders. What that should tell you is I need to be more diligent. Like one of the examples I always tell people is if you're in that situation, doing some of the imaging studies and doing some of the EKG studies, even if you have to pay out of pocket, is probably better for you in the long run. And you would not know any of that information unless you order these kinds of genetic tests. It's an unknown thing. You don't know what your genetics is telling you about something until you order the test. And once you order the test, this can inform how you approach your health going forward. So that's a classic one I always like to tell people.
And I would say I fit into that category where my coronary artery disease risk is high and my atherosclerosis risk is high, right?
Yeah.
Those are my genetic risks. And then I have high lipoproteins and lipids. So high cholesterol, and ApoB actually is the one that's genetically high, and lipoprotein A, and those are the most stubborn to get down. I have also high risk in my family, so I think I got to lower those lipoproteins, which I do.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. We also have a report on variants within PCSK9. I found that actually helps me quite a lot, the PCSK9 inhibitor.
Yeah.
And it shows that my PCSK9 is actually higher. Now, it's not 100% clear. It could still help me if it wasn't, but the idea is that that one seems to help me the most by far.
Oh, it makes sense. And the other thing I was going to say, we have the pharmacogenomic report, and it made a lot of sense with Joe because it said he might not tolerate statins very well, and you tried those before and you didn't tolerate them. You got the muscle aches and stuff.
I got the muscle aches, yeah. No, I didn't tolerate them.
Yeah, it's perfect. If you would have ordered that test before you ever went on that, it would have been like, okay, statins are not good. Go to the PCSK9.
At the very least, I would have maybe tried one. At the most, I would have tried one. Instead, I tried I tried four.
Yeah.
Because you go to the doctor, they keep on telling you, try a different one. I tried 2 already. This one, sometimes people don't get side effects. All right, fine. Try 3. Then they're like, try 4.
It's because they're not running the genetic test. This is the whole point.
Right.
The genetic test
is
telling you all this information. All right.
Literally, I'm just trying like different ones, and every single one is giving me muscle pain and impaired cognition.
But not to jump on another soapbox with a scam. The reason that doctors are forced to do this is insurance companies. Because insurance companies do not care about you. So they're like, I don't want to pay for these genetic tests. Why don't you just giving them statins until they either quit and I don't have to give them the PCSK9 because it's expensive. That's one of the things. You got to take health into your own hands. your insurance company does not give a flying you-know-what about your health. So a lot of times you got to just pay out of pocket for this stuff, take it in your hands, and make sure you're okay, because they don't care what happens to you. As long as you don't get
Yeah,
sick during when they're having you covered, that's the only thing they care about.
because it's not lifetime. You're not on their plan for life. That you could switch on, switch off. What do they care? You're just like, okay, well, you're on our plan for a year or 2 years. We just don't want you to die during that time or get really sick. But after, have fun, right?
Yeah, exactly. Go do whatever you need to do, So.
Exactly. That's really the problem. Okay, so let's go through now all the ways that you could use genetics that are clinically significant. One, you're talking about polygenic risk scoring. We could use that to predict what's going to happen in the future and try to make intelligent decisions about, okay, or more advanced testing. For example, I did the imaging testing, and some of that showed I had small amounts of plaque, actually. Like you said, you could do some of this. This is like a screening for a whole bunch of different stuff. And then once you know what you're at risk for, you could say, okay, I got this in my mind. Now let me basically triage and try to figure out what am I going to do more advanced testing for. And if you're at higher risk for colon cancer, maybe instead of waiting till you're 45, you could do it at 40, right? With one of these colonoscopies. Yeah. So that's the decision that people need to make with their doctor, of course. But this is a different kind of medicine where you have information that it's not just if this, then that. You have to take into account multiple pieces of information together, right? It's not like you have a high polygenic risk for cardiovascular disease. When you're 30 years old, now you need to be on a statin, right? Let's look at your lab numbers. Let's look at all these different cardiovascular disease markers. Maybe let's do some advanced imaging. Let's look at your hereditary risk and things like that, your family risk, and then make a combined decision based on that.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So you're looking at, okay, so you're using this as a prediction to see what's going on in the future. And a lot of times things come up suddenly. Like you were telling me once that if you have a risk for diabetes, you might have normal blood sugar, and then one day you just get an infection, you got diabetes the next day.
This happens all the time. There was actually a paper published where it's really like a knockout paper, where they figured out what happened is a lot of African Americans seem to have not diabetes and suddenly get a diabetic complication. And they're like, what is going on here? And so they went back and looked at it, and what happened is they had artificially lower HbA1c because their genetics was making it lower, right? So the hemoglobin A1c, it was low because the genetics was making them low. That means they didn't have diabetes. That didn't mean they didn't have diabetes. They had diabetes and so what would happen is by the time they went to the doctor and the doctor was like, it's elevated, they're like, you already had diabetic to foot complications and things like that. That's
diabetic neuropathy. Wow.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, it's crazy. And once again, there's another paper kind of saying the same thing with how useful these genetic tests are, because it's giving you information on these things. The other classic one, which we already have with the pharmacogenomic report, or even what we do with the supplements, is a lot of times a drug could work for somebody, doesn't work for anybody else. A supplement could work for somebody and doesn't work for anybody else. A lot of that is genetically driven. And that's why we have that huge database that we have of all the supplements and so on. And then there's also drugs. A lot of times, for instance, psychiatric medication. To the doctors, it looks like it's let's just throwing random stuff at the wall and seeing what works and what doesn't work. But really, it's actually it's being driven by the genetics. And so those are the two classic things we can also provide you through a genetic test.
So this one is a little more controversial, and I've heard your take before, but I'm curious. You could tell what you think. The other way people use genetics is, like a lot of functional medicine will use it for supplements. So they'll say, well, if you have this genetic variant, and sometimes there's direct studies. The way we do it is a little different because we actually look at your symptoms, conditions, goals, all of your polygenetic risks, plus your lab risks, plus your lifestyle risks. And then we'll include some individual genetic variants. And then we come up, okay, so based on all this information, here's something you might consider, right? Yeah. The controversial part is making a recommendation based on specific genetic variants, just alone, not doing everything that we're doing, right? Not including all the other stuff. What do you think of that?
It's controversial. So you don't actually know what the true answer is with one of those things, because what I call it is hypothesis-driven medicine, right? It makes sense from a hypothesis standpoint. You're like, oh yeah, this makes complete sense. It's almost like a lock and key. You found it. Okay, so let me describe. The problem is there's no validation data for that. Right, that's really, you don't actually know if this thing is actually going to work the way the guy says. Now, If you take it and you feel great, go perfect. That doesn't
Right.
matter. But that's like why we have to do it a little bit differently, where we try to take tons of this other information and because we're trying to make sure that what we have is that they at least have some validation out there with it where you can trust the recommendation. But
Right.
I get why some functional medicine doctors do that. But like I said, it's just because there's no validation data, it's hard to know. But as I tell people, if someone recommended it and you're taking it and you feel better, keep taking it. You don't need anything else. But
And I want to be clear, the way we built the system, SelfDecode, we said, okay, let's do all this stuff that will be accepted into the clinical system, hospitals in the future, but let's also do all the stuff that all the functional medicine is doing, right?
Yeah,
and
correct.
because it's much easier to do that stuff, actually. That stuff is the easy part.
Yeah.
You just the single, doing a couple variants, putting some genetics, making some reports out of it. So that's what we did. We replicated every single one of these other companies, and it was quite easy just to replicate all these companies, because if you're using like 20 genes or whatever, it's like, all right, we replicated and made them even better. So anybody who's doing functional medicine could use the platform, and not only they could use the conventional side of the genetics, and they could also use the alternative side, the functional side.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, it's hypothesis driven. And the reason we feel comfortable putting it in there is there's nothing that says that's not valid. It's not like when people are taking the 3 steps, we know that's not good. We know that's BS, right? But the rest of the stuff, it's like someone smart thought about it. This is their hypothesis. We just don't put it up there.
Right.
Now
we put it up there and they could use it if they want. If not, they don't have to, right? So
as a general rule, correct. Our belief is if we know something is bullshit and wrong, we don't put it on the system. Now, if we know if we put it up there, and if someone wants to use it and feel better, go right ahead.
Right. But yeah, in general, the way we did the recommendations is different. We included symptoms, conditions, goals, and the clinical trials behind them. And those are weighted more than just if there's a genetic variant attached. Plus, we're looking at all the polygenic risks that people have risk for.
Correct.
Plus, we're looking at the lifestyle risks. And then the individual variants are more of a minor piece of that puzzle, much, much more minor. It's a small piece, but they can sometimes maybe they have some weighting there. But that's the idea. Okay, so let's just go through some of the things. We're going to be doing whole genome now, right? And I want people to understand what they can get from a whole genome test.
Okay. The thing is, I would say we're doing whole genome. Tons of other people doing whole genome. What makes our whole genome the most unique product on the market in a direct-to-consumer fashion is that it'll come with what we refer to as clinical interpretation. Now, when you go order a whole genome from Nebula, you get some random thing, and it's just like this huge file with all the variants, and they're like, good luck, we'll see you later. It doesn't mean anything to you. It doesn't mean anything. You have to spend 7 years combing papers. What we do is we're providing clinical.
If you can even open the file.
Yeah, if you can even open
special
the file.
software.
You need special software. If you can do some coding and you know how to get an AWS, you get over it. But what we're providing is clinical interpretation. We're gonna tell you if what these variants mean. We're linking them to 12 different databases. Some of them are even internal, and we're going through the process of telling you these rare variants you have that you can't test with anything else but whole genome sequencing are associated with these diseases, and they're increasing your risk for these diseases by this much. This is and so on. It is a full clinical interpretation. Once this thing comes out, it's going to be the single best whole genome sequencing with clinical interpretation on the market because it's all inclusive. If, for instance, in medical practice, if you have some weird symptoms and they don't know what it is, and they suspect it's a genetic thing, they order one of these. A doctor will order one of these things for you, and it's called the clinical interpretation. But in that scenario, they only focus on the person's clinical symptoms. They leave everything else alone. They're not telling you all the rest of the information, right? And they're charging you like $3,000 for these tests because the clinical interpretation is very difficult, right? And ours is not only going to have that ability to tell you, hey, there's this rare, ultra rare genetic variant you have that's increasing your inflammation, for instance, or it's making you more likely to have this disorder. It's going to have everything. So all the polygenic risk scores we have, all the rare variants, all the clinical interpretation, the whole thing is going to come out. And when it comes out, there just won't be anything like it on the market. It'll be the most comprehensive test you can order to find out what your genetics means. And it's a test you're going to have information on for the rest of your life because the genetics is never going to change.
So let's go through that a little more. I think people need to understand that when you do one of these tests, this kind of new test, everybody has a whole bunch of rare variants, even if you're very healthy, right?
Correct.
Everybody.
Correct.
How many rare variants?
Tons.
How many rare variants? Like
So it depends
hundreds?
so it depends how rare you go on the scale.
Okay.
It's anywhere, if you go to ultra rare, it's like hundreds to like tens of thousands, right? Depending on
Ultra rare would be what?
would be like stuff that's so rare that a lot of times it doesn't have data on what the allele frequency is. They've only found like a handful of people who have these. Okay, to stuff that's only found in 1 in 100,000 people or 1 in 1 million people, right?
Okay.
And these things, and it makes intuitive sense if you think about evolution, right? These things are actually really important from a clinical perspective. That's why they're rare. Evolution has been driven them out for the past thousands of years, so they don't. Everybody has it. So the classic example is that you could get this test and find out everything else about you is okay, but you have some ultra rare variant that is increasing your risk for a heart attack by 3 to 4. And there's no way you would find out this information unless you ordered one of these tests. Now, the chances of you giving that example to you is very rare. But every one of us is at least having 1 or 2 of these things that's impacting our health. And there's no way to know this without ordering one of these tests.
So it would be impacting our health in a very significant way. And
Very,
especially a lot of people have just a unique problem. Like
Correct.
one person I know has this, they got this reaction to mold, and one person got an infection and then they can't function after.
Correct.
Or one person, and there's a lot of rare problems, but when you combine them together, a lot of people have like different varieties of these collagen disorders, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome.
Correct. Yeah.
And when you combine together, it's probably a lot of people have these issues. It's just different ones. Everybody's got their own thing.
Correct.
And then
Exactly right. Yeah.
And then some person doesn't have any issue, and then they just get a heart attack when they're 25.
It was a silent killer. No, that's exactly right.
No, but they probably had some rare genetic variant that was causing their heart disease risk, right? That's not even a polygenic thing. You're not going to get that from.
Yeah, exactly. If you hear these cases, this guy was perfectly healthy. He suddenly died of a heart attack at 28, 29, 31. It's almost always, if you sequence them, they have some extremely rare gene knockout that was like hugely important. And it wasn't something that changed your LDL. It was literally like how the plaque forms, and that if they formed ultra plaques. Like there was another one, we have some sample cases we're testing, and there was another one, we know this, I can't get into everything about this person, but this person had a massive, weird arrangement on their immune function. And it was almost like they were constantly in a state of flu. Now, they didn't actually feel the symptoms or anything, but it was one of these people who's constantly like, I don't feel good. And you see it. It's up there.
Most of the people I know have some kind of weird issue that makes their health is unique. Now, there's a lot of the risk is just driven, probably most of the risk is just driven by polygenic risk score. So you just add up a million variants, and based on the combination of all these variants, you're going to say, okay, you're more likely to have this and that and the other. Most of the issues people are dealing with are from most of the more common variants, but that are added up. But the problem is that these are not looking at the super rare variants that make you extra unique. It's okay, you've got this weird issue that nobody else has. You're not sure how it came. And I just find a lot of people like that. So you're saying this kind of test would help you figure out where these kind of weird issues are coming from.
Absolutely.
Okay, it's coming from this gene. This is what the gene does. Here's how it might interact with your system. Here's what you need to look into.
Yeah, it's the thing about it is also because it's unique. It's unique. So it's not you're gonna know exactly what to do about it, but you're gonna have information that is gonna change how you approach life. If you find out you have some rare variants that are really increasing your inflammatory response, it's probably like Joe over here. You're going to go about going, okay, how do I decrease inflammation? It's not the same thing as, there's a drug for this. There's not money to make drugs personalized for each individual or like some person individual. If you know your increased inflammation, then you just go through and those are the things you do about it.
The mechanism by which it's coming from also, and then that allows you to research things much better. So for me, for example, I know that it took me a while to know it, but at a certain point I figured out, okay, maybe when I was 26, 27, all my issues, like the ones that are making me weird, I've got other issues, but like I would say they're the common stuff, right? There's stuff like, okay, you get in a bad mood from a lot of stress, right? Whatever, something like that. Or you got a little ADHD, or you got some little bit of higher risk of cardiovascular disease. This is all the common stuff that is normal in the population. And then maybe you get a little bit of a worse genetics here, better genetics there, right? In some places I got better genetics, in some places worse. But one of the things I noticed that I'm just like different than normal people, I got these food sensitivities very early on. And whereas I think people are sensitive to foods, they just get it later on and it's not debilitating. Some of it's okay, you get some allergies or you get a little bit of inflammation, you get maybe a runny nose here and there. And I think people get it later on. I think I got it very early on and it was more serious. But if I would have known, and I'm actually still curious, once we have this out, I'm going to do this. I'm very curious to see what my results are. Yeah, customer number one. I want to see what my results are so that I can actually see. I have some ideas, but I don't know exactly. Once I get that report, I'll be able to see much more specifically. I could scan some of the pathways or genes and be like, correct. Okay, this is what I suspected here. Hit that harder.
Okay. And the reason I love this test so much, it's like a test that everybody can stand benefit from. Some person who doesn't want to go digging, they're just going to get the top line most important things that are validated and so on. You have these increases your risk. But someone like Joe, like a biohacker, who really wants to go in depth, they're going to have at least months of time if they want to spend it to go into as depth as possible as you want. So it could be anyone from like a person who's just like, hey, I want to know if I have any kind of like weird thing that's increasing my risk of Alzheimer's or cardiovascular disease, to somebody like Joe who wants to completely use that for a biohacking thing to really optimize their health. They're going to be able to use that for the rest of their lives as a test.
Okay, sounds great. So I'm really looking forward to the new product. And I think combined with the polygenic risk scoring, the pharmacogenomics, all the functional stuff we have, the recommendations engine, what else do we have? There's a lot of other things that you could do, but now we're going to be having the rare genetic variant stuff. So that's going to be a whole new thing. And then that's also going to include the disease variants as well.
Correct. Yeah, it's going to be, literally, I'm telling you, you're not going to find a more comprehensive genetic report on the market. It's going to be something else.
Right. And then we also have a family planning report, which is like carrier status to tell you if you have any genetic conditions. We have the longevity screener, which is a project we were working on for a while that we combine lifestyle information with the genetics to make more accurate prediction models. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. The idea is you have your genetics, but there's tons of other stuff that are also increasing your risk. So one of the things we're working on long-term over here, and longevity screener version 1 is the first version of that, is where we're also giving clinical information like how old you are, your sex, what diseases you have, what your BMI is, and so on, to these polygenic risk models to make predictions that take all that into account. And so long-term, what's going to happen in the future, and we're going to deliver this, is you're going to come in and we're going to know all the information about you from a clinical perspective, all your labs, all your age, everything about your ancestry, all that stuff. And that with the genetics is going to help us really fine-tune and predict who's at increased risk for what, who should be taking what medication, who should be taking what supplementation. And that's really precision medicine. If you guys don't use LinkedIn that much, but if you follow LinkedIn, we're always like paving the road for precision medicine, and that's where we're trying to go. We're trying to create an all-inclusive platform where it's no longer trial and error. We're going to know beforehand, this is what you got to watch out for, this is what you got to take, and this is what you got to do next. And it's like a new age of medicine, and it's going to turn everybody into a Joe biohacker without having to do all the work that Joe is doing for all his biohacking. We'll make it
100%. 100%. Yeah, I think there's a lot of promises of precision health, but I really don't see a lot of companies actually implementing it. It's really just talk. The only ones I see really paving the way, innovating in this space is really us, right? Really understanding bring together a comprehensive system in order to personalize health and figure out what is the best approach. What does somebody need to do in order to be optimally healthy, prevent disease, increase health span, increase longevity? And so it's really cool.
It's very exciting. We're going to hopefully we'll having this conversation when me and Joe both 110 and still having a functional because of all the stuff we did. So that's the goal right there.
All right. Thanks for coming on, Puya.
All right. Thank you for having me. Take care.
Thanks. 67% of listeners aren't subscribed to the show, so please don't forget to show your support by hitting the subscribe button now. You'll not only be supporting the show, but also investing in yourself and your health journey, all while helping to keep us ad-free.